everyone, my name is Crystal McMullen. I'm going to be presenting today on behalf of myself and my colleagues Samantha Brown and Kevin Beccaria. I'm going to be talking to you all, a bit about some things that we've learnt so far in our first offering of a standalone 6th-year program. So that's being a post-general registration clinical psychology master's degree. So how this all began was back in 2018 when we were first, became aware of the new 2019 standards and what was being changed as a part of those standards. So as I'm sure many of you know, there were some really important and pivotal changes that were made in the 2019 standards, which provided some really fantastic opportunities in the postgraduate psychology space. So a couple of things, that here at USQ we really jumped on was the removal of the traditional thesis. So the 2019 standards enabled education providers to offer a variety of different ways to meet that research competency rather than just the standard traditional thesis, which was really exciting. It also provided, a bit more of a focused approach to 5th and 6th year training at a master's level. So in terms of 5th year, that really being focused on those professional competencies leading to general registration. And then the 6th year is really focusing on competencies for a specialised area of practice. In our case, we were really looking at this in terms of clinical psychology area of specialisation. So the 2019 standards enabled for the first time ever something that was really long awaited for by those of us in the industry who were hoping it was coming, which was the new standalone 6th year. So an opportunity for fully registered psychologists to come back in a 1-year time frame and be able to get their clinical psychology qualification. So now we are officially 18 months in, or just over 18 months as of this month, just over 18 months into this program, and we'd really like to share with you some of the things that we've learnt. We're really excited to be able to see other universities offering this program now, to have some collaborators to work with and to benchmark with in the coming years. What's worked really well? We had lots and lots of interest in the program, so even though it obviously hadn't been widely advertised in the first reiteration because it was such a short time frame from when we were offering it. We received lots and lots of interest in people really wanting to gain their clinical endorsement. So our application numbers were really strong, which was excellent. Our students commented a lot on really liking the full day workshop mode, liking that by having workshops that spanned a full day, it provided an opportunity to have lots of different aspects to their learning. So watching videos, doing role plays, doing activities, having small group discussions, large group discussions, etc. So the students really provided a lot of positive feedback, which was great, about the full day workshop mode. In our first year, we ran that as weekly 1-day workshops. In our second year, which is this year, 2021, we actually decided to provide and trial an external option. So the external option was a combination of week-long residential schools on campus, as well as for some courses a small amount of online workshops. So students really provided great positive feedback about the increased flexibility of that external option. And as I'm sure you're going to be very surprised to hear, they were really happy about not having to do a full traditional thesis option. Some of the challenges that we have faced as a result of this program, it's been a really exciting time, but there's been lots of challenges and things that we had to really figure out as we were going. One that was particularly challenging was that we already had a 2-year master's, a traditional 5th and 6th year master's. And then we were adding in this new program, the MCPA, which was students who were just going directly into 6th year. What that meant was in all of our 6th year courses, we had a combination of students in their 2nd year of a traditional clinical program, as well as experienced psychs coming back in to do the 6th year coursework. So what we found was whilst both cohorts really brought their own strengths into the classroom, trying to meet the needs of both cohorts simultaneously in one classroom was actually a real challenge for our lecturers and our course examiners as well. A second challenge that became really apparent as we've progressed in this program, and is that the nature of the psychology industry, as many of you would be aware who work in the industry, is that people tend to have a real niche in where they work. So for example, you might work solely in child and adolescent psychology, which is what I do myself. Or, we might have people who work, particularly in the health psychology context, or only work with adults, etc. So that real common psychology focus that we see in the industry, when that translates to those psychologists coming in and doing coursework, what it meant was that they felt very competent and very familiar with one or more of our courses. So for a psychologist who works predominantly with children and adolescents in the industry, they obviously were very familiar with most of, if not all of the content for our child and adolescent 6th year course. So that was particularly tricky because we want to make sure we're providing a great learning opportunity across all of our courses for all of our students, but we had no budget whatsoever to be able to offer an elective style program. It just wasn't a possibility for us, unfortunately. So what we attempted to do was really, I guess, acknowledge right at the outset of the program that every MCPA student is coming in with different strengths and different areas that they're more or less comfortable with. And the nature of our program is that there's going to be courses they do that they learn a lot and it's really new and unfamiliar to them. And there may be other courses where it's content they're much more familiar with. For some students, they were really accepting of that and quite happy to have courses that were easier and courses that were more challenging for them. For some other students, they were understandably frustrated that they felt whilst they learnt a lot in some courses, in content areas they were really familiar with, they didn't feel like they learnt as much. Yeah. And they provided feedback around that being a bit frustrating for them. Another, I guess, thing that we have recognised, which is certainly, I guess, the difficulty with the standalone program, is that there's many generally registered psychologists out there who have been working in very similar clinical psychology roles and clinical psychology fields for some time. So for those students, they really felt like that they wanted the clinical psychology qualification, but that they genuinely felt like they had already learnt everything that was in the 6th year and had well and truly already met those 6th year competencies. So that was really tricky, trying to figure out what we could provide to those students to make it feel like it was a worthwhile experience for them. And finally, despite our pleading and our recommendations during the assessment phase, the interview phase rather, for people to really take it seriously that this is a master's level training program and it's not something they're going to be able to fit into their spare time. It's something that they're really going to have to dedicate proper time to. We found that many of them made the decision to still work at least 4 or 5 days a week. And of course, that made it really tricky when they had assessments and things like that due. So what that resulted in was many, many extension requests and late submissions, much more so, significantly more so than we'd ever experienced with either of our more traditional master's programs. Probably the biggest challenge we actually experienced in year 1 was actually relating to the practicum. So as a way of trying to make sure students had a great learning experience and experience growth of their skills in the program, whilst also trying to balance that with the fact that we know that students are really busy and that they've got a lot going on in their work and personal lives to balance with their study, we decided to trial allowing students to use one of their 2 practicum in their workplace. So most students elected to do that as their first prac. So whilst they very much appreciated and were very excited that that was an option, it did result in a number of really significant difficulties. Probably the biggest for us was the dual relationship. So where someone is using an existing workplace where have the identity as an employee already, yeah, or even a past workplace where they're known to that workplace as an employee, to then have to simultaneously be in the role of student presented itself as a real difficulty, something that some students identify themselves as a concern, but certainly we heard from a lot of placement sites and I guess general industry feedback that they felt that dual relationship was a real difficulty, which we agree with. One of the other difficulties we experienced, which we certainly didn't, I guess, predict as much as we probably should have, was that many of the applicants for the MCPA were those who owned their own private practices. So they then chose their practicum as their own workplace, which they owned. that presented an even more of a conflict of interest or dual relationship, because they were then, I guess, paying supervisors externally, and it made it very challenging to know whether or not a supervisor would truly give them genuine feedback. Something we didn't expect was that because we allowed students to use their workplace as a first practicum, it meant that they didn't need to, I guess, allocate any additional time for their pracs. So when they finished their workplace practicum and it was time to then move on to their next prac, where they would have to decrease their work hours to allow time, 2 to 3 days for their prac, we found that a lot of students just kind of got stuck at that point and found it really difficult to allocate the time that was necessary to actually commence the second prac. So whilst they happily were able to get through their first prac, which was in their workplace, and that efficiency of that, I guess, that lure, by the time it got to the second prac, they really kind of dragged their feet in terms of getting that second prac started. And finally, we received a lot of concerns from staff, industry, sort of some key industry contacts and employers who told us that they were quite surprised that students were allowed to use their workplace as a placement in sixth year, and who, again, quite understandably felt that that didn't really lead to sufficient growth of their skills in line with what you'd expect from a sixth year prac. Yep. And that is certainly something that we took really seriously. So what we actually did about it was initially we floated the idea of potentially just not allowing any paid practicums, but we also had a number of really good placement opportunities where the organisations wanted to pay for service. So we had to figure out a way to try to come up with a bit of a compromise. So what we decided, and we came up with a set of criteria around that, yes, placements can be paid. We're not going to prevent that, and we're not going to not allow that, but it has to be a new experience. So it can't be a current or previous workplace. And then it must be very clear that the student's engagement in that site is as a student. So some criteria put in place was that there's a clear short-term contract in place, which is obviously spans the length of the placement contract. And that the student is seen as a student in that place, not an ongoing employee. So whilst we didn't say that, of course, it's common for students to be offered jobs at the end of a placement, there was a clear start and finish to when they were in the contract phase of the placement, and then any future employment contracts were very clearly separate. So overall, from us at USQ, it's been a really exciting but definitely very challenging journey. We're really excited to be able to provide this pathway that's been long awaited for clinical endorsement for all psychs out there who are interested in that. We have really enjoyed having fellow clinicians in our program. It's really exciting to see what different corners of the industry people work in and hear about all the wonderful work that they do. So it's been genuinely enjoyable to get to know these clinicians, even though they're coming back in a student capacity. They really don't feel like students to us, they feel like colleagues. And certainly, whilst it's been wonderful and really enjoyable, it's really challenging to meet, this MCPA cohort because they're a really heterogeneous group. Yeah, they don't have the same sets of needs from one to the other, but it's something we're working on. So it's a bit of a watch this space scenario.